In the 12 years that I've known Judge Manning, I've been struck by at least two factors. First, his capacity to make us all feel uncomfortable for the greater good. I recall when we were creating the Friday Institute and we held an educational conference and invited Judge Manning to speak to us about the Leandro case. He systematically called out each group of educators, higher ed, K-12 teachers, principals, superintendents, and others in the room, and told us specifically what we needed to be doing in order to ensure that all North Carolina children could have a sound basic education. Each one of us left that conference with renewed commitment and determination. He definitely got our attention. And the second factor that I've been impressed with is Judge Manning's ability to pore over educational data to determine how students are doing in the schools. You saw that in the video. He was constantly working with the data, analyzing the data, and it was very common for him to make phone calls. He would call folks here at the Friday Institute. He might call other professors at other universities or folks at DPI, and he would have very detailed questions. And it was very important when you got that phone call for you to have the answer to that question. And if you didn't have the answer, you needed to go find it right away. But you can see that he also coupled that studious approach with being on the ground and seeing firsthand what was going on in the schools. So I think that combination really made him very special as a judge over the case. So we are very fortunate to have this narrative of Judge Manning speaking in his own words and the account of what the legislation entailed and how difficult it is to implement in North Carolina, where 1 in 4 children live in poverty. Well, this evening, we're also fortunate to have some of the key actors in the Leandro decision be with us to share their perspectives and particularly how they viewed Judge Manning's roles and actions within the case. So I'm going to ask our panelists to come forward now, and you know who you are. I'm going to start with Burley Mitchell. Burley, you appointed Judge Manning to monitor the implementation of the Leandro decision. We'd like for you to relay your thoughts about Leandro specifically, and then why you chose Judge Manning for this position over other judges.
I don't know if this thing, yeah.
It's working.
In order to do that, Hiller, I'm going to have to go back quickly to some history of education. Judge Manning's father and I were active. I was blessed to be with him. He was one of the best lawyers North Carolina ever produced. We were active in the follow-up, final cleanup from the decision in Brown against the Board of Education, which ordered integration in public education specifically, but public facilities as well. And in the process, I was representing the state superintendent and the state Board of Education. Big Howard, as we call him, was representing Wake County, and he represented a couple other counties as well. So we made a tour, not very voluntarily, of the federal courts in North Carolina during what was known as the period of massive resistance. That's when school districts all over the country were going with all deliberate slowness to implement Brown. And having seen that and seen how the federal courts had to just drag it out every step of the way, I knew what we were going to be facing when we decided Leandro after the vote and when it was time to write the opinion. So when I sat down and wrote that opinion, I had all of that history in mind. I knew that just as night follows day, our decision in Leandro was going to be resisted. Some of it kind of adamantly and belligerently. Others, people feeling like we just didn't get it and understand their problems or their educational expertise, you know. So I knew we were gonna have resistance at every step. And I wrote the opinion a particular way, tried to be very careful to tell the trial judge who was actually gonna get this, how this should go. Again, and Howdy knew it as I did, with each of the steps of resistance. First, we told the educators and the legislature, this is an obligation of the state. You must do this. And it does have a qualitative component to it. Just having a building open and a teacher there is no good at all. Actually, it's a waste if you're not going to turn out kids who can perform in their society. So, and that was something that had, up until that time, had not been recognized. We had, this position of the state had always been the buildings there, the teachers there, the books are there, do the best you can. So the state was going to resist that. The legislature, I had one legislator get down there on the floor and just one of my friends, and just blow me out about, on the floor of the Senate about the courts trying to run the world and everything. And I called him afterwards. In North Carolina, we've always been close enough, the legislative and judicial and executive branch. I called him, I pulled him aside. I said, listen, why don't you shut up about that? And what you want to do is go down and when you vote the appropriation, you just tell the taxpayers, the devil made me do it. We were ordered by the Supreme Court. I didn't have any. Put it on me. That's all right. I'm quite willing to take that. So after a while, he thought about it and then went back and tried to do it that way. But anyway, that's too much history maybe. But I knew that at each of these stages, if we ordered the districts to do something particular, ordered the legislature to take particular steps, which Judge Manning Howdy, we call him, had to do, that it would be, if it was resisted, different steps would have to be taken. And I compared it to just ratcheting down a little, click, 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 each time you ran into resistance. Of course, the ultimate thing is that you can hold everybody in contempt and order them to jail, but that is not really a viable alternative. It's we don't have the 82nd Airborne. What the courts have always had is the force of moral suasion. We say it in a nonpartisan way. We base it on our Constitution, and we have to count on the citizens following it. Howdy understood this as well as I did, but I knew when we were going to go through these steps that I was going to have somebody who was tenacious as all get out, who was very bright, who wouldn't be diverted from his course, and who understood, as we said in the opinion, it's not a question of money. That's the plaintiffs had couched it in money, but we were all trying to get to the same thing, which was the kids getting a sound basic education. We pointed out in the opinion that the most generously funded school system in the country was one of the poorest performing. And that was the original Topeka, Kansas board. They built them an Olympic swimming pool for the high school, had all kinds of teams, had great equipment, but they still weren't performing academically. So it was something more than that. The only way was to measure not the input, but the output, what kind of product we were getting. Howdy grasped that immediately, and he never deviated from it. But I knew we were going to have somebody who was smart, who was tenacious. And I said in one group when I asked this question, why did you choose him, with his wife present? I said, well, what I wanted was the meanest SOB on the bench. And I knew Howdy was my man. Howdy and I had known each other since law school. My first day, I guess, in law school, I went in, and here sat this boy on a bench outside old Manning Hall, pair of khaki pants, Weegian loafers and no socks, typical Eastern North Carolina guy. And he said, now, I'm Howard Manning Jr. I'm to take you around, show you the building, and tell you how things operate around here. And He says, now, the faculty and the dean are going to tell you how things work. He says, but now I'm going to tell you how they really work. And he did. And that's the kind of practicality and seeing through the BS that I knew was going to be needed. And he has filled the position admirably. The children of this state and their parents will never fully appreciate how much they owe Howard Manning. He has given his heart and soul and a large part of his life to this undertaking, and we could not have had a better steward. I hope the next judge will pick it up, be just as tenacious, and carry it forward, because the work has made progress. It really has. We still have too many kids who can't read well and who can't do math well, but we have made progress, and we will continue to. And again, it is the child's constitutional right in North Carolina.
Thank you. So I'm going to move to Bill Harrison. Bill, over the course of Leandro, you've held two positions, first as the superintendent of Hoke County and then the chair of the state board. What were your interactions with Judge Manning from those two different vantage points?
Well, I guess I had the privilege to be a plaintiff and be a defendant
Yes.
in that case. And it wasn't the principal who turned red over the Plato lab, it was the superintendent who turned red. And it was interesting. Chairman Lee at the time gave me a call, I guess the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and said, would you mind if Judge Manning came to visit you on Wednesday? And I said, Howard, do I have a choice? And he said, no. I said, I look forward to spending the day with him. And we got in the car, and I was kind of a skeptical superintendent at the time, I would say, that what is this judge coming down here trying to tell me how to do my work? But by the time he left, the respect I gained for Judge Manning in that 3-4 hour period was just remarkable. We went to the school, and we had a science and math academy that served 75 students. And so quickly after his cookies, we took him to the math and science academy. And he said, I don't really care about these 75 kids. I want to see what you're doing for the other 1,200. So we walked around the school and visited, and we did come across the Plato lab that we forgot to pay the subscription. And he told me that he wanted that in by Thanksgiving, and I think we had that turned on by the time he got back to Raleigh. But one of the things that really impressed me the other thing is, in addition to Plato, he really liked freshman academies. And we had a freshman academy going on at that school, and we stopped in the school, and the students were all going through an activity of watching a video and talking about groups of people who have been persecuted in history. And Judge Manning asked the teacher if he could share a story about some people that had been persecuted not too far from here. And he did a 20-minute lecture for those 9th grade students and held them captivated about the Lumbee Indians just down the road. And we got in my car to go back to the office, and I said, well, Judge, how in the world did you know that much about the Lumbee people? And he said, I did a case a number of years ago, and when I have a case, I kind of study up on it. And so he did a great deal of research and learned about the tribe and the people. And he did the same thing with education. He had this case and took it very, very serious. He is incredibly brilliant, incredibly tenacious. And so after that day, I just had a respect for Judge Manning. And then when I moved to Raleigh for my term as CEO and chairman of the state board, Judge Manning said the state will take over the Halifax County schools. So I went down to see him, and I said, Judge, what do you mean by the state taking over the Halifax County schools? He says, that's for you to tell me. You figure it out and go down there and fix it. Pat Ashley and her team did an incredible job over the course of, I guess, 4 years, wherever Pat is. Pat had to go teach. And I think they made some great progress. But during that time, I had an awful lot of conversations with Judge Manning. And again, that appreciation and respect I had for him just continued to grow. And then I guess I left the state board in 2013, and I think it was Gerry Hancock who called me about testifying for the first time. So I'd been involved in this case since 1994 when I was superintendent in Hoke County. And I testified, I guess, in it was 2014. Judge Manning has, I think, over that time, I think I can safely say became a friend, someone I have the utmost respect for, I've learned from. And the children, as Chief said, the children of this state are certainly in a better position because we had a judge that had the courage that he had to do the things and say the things and write the things that took an awful lot of courage. And I've long said that we can take care of all the children that we have the responsibility of serving if we truly have the political will and the courage to make it happen. Unfortunately, we don't have enough Judge Mannings out there. We don't have enough people that do have the political will and the courage to make it happen, but he's well up there on my list of heroes.
Thank you. Howard, you've spent quite a bit of time with Judge Manning, and he mentioned that the two of you would visit schools. Can you share some thoughts about Judge Manning's role in this case?
Well, when Governor Easley asked me to become chair of the state board, it was not part of my plans to start traveling around the state visiting schools. But then I got a call from Judge Manning, and I didn't know him well, and sometimes I had questioned what was really driving Judge Manning to take the stance he was taking. So he came over and we sat down and talked. And I was so impressed with his commitment and with his dedication that we decided we would form a partnership and start visiting schools, because he said I didn't know enough about what really was going on out there, and I needed to get on the ground and understand what was going on. He said, you know, you've been insulated in the legislature, and y'all don't know what's going on, so I'm going to take you out, and we're going to go find out what's really happening. It's the best experience I have ever had in my life. I have had some very exciting and challenging experiences, but there is none that will ever reach the level of the challenge and excitement I had with Judge Manning. I wish I could share some of the conversations we had in the car, but the language would not be suitable for mixed company. It's both, because as we would go to various schools, and we would see what was not being done, and we would find things that we knew could be done better and didn't always see the level of dedication and commitment that we felt needed to be there. I remember one time we went to visit the superintendent in Columbus County. And this superintendent was not very receptive of both Judge Manning and me coming to question how things were going in that particular county. I have seen a lot of people unload on other people. I have never seen anyone unload on a person as Judge Manning unloaded on this person. And the superintendent ended up being very apologetic and told Judge Manning, if you ever come back here again, I'm going to have everything perfect and you will have nothing to worry about because I hear what you're saying. But this man is probably as dedicated as any I have ever known. We got really lucky, and Bill mentioned Pat Ashley. Pat Ashley's husband, Bob, was a student when I was mayor of Chapel Hill. That's one of the advantages of getting old. You know, the kids who were students at the time now come back as adults and successful professionals. And Bob was moving back because he'd been offered the position at the Durham Herald, and Pat needed a job. She had been in Kentucky and had done a lot of turnaround work in Kentucky. And I remember I was so impressed with Pat, I came back and talked with June and said, you really ought to take a look at Pat. And she did, and immediately hired Pat on the spot. Judge Manning came over and wanted to know what our plan would be in terms of supporting these schools, and June introduced him to Pat, and he absolutely fell in love with Pat. And he felt, in the time that we were together, he always thought that Pat was going to be the person who would take us to the next level in many of these schools. You know, Judge Manning is probably one of the smartest people I have worked with in terms of being able to analyze facts and to cut to the chase and be able to relate where a situation is and where it needs to go. I would always get in the car and he would have developed all these documents, and he would hand me these documents and say, now I need you to study before we get to the school. By the time we got to the school, I knew as much about that school as anyone in terms of being able to ask the right questions and make a decision. I could go on. I could probably do the equal hour that you all said he did on the tape based on our experiences together. But I'll wind up by saying someday historians will write about the experiences we've had in education in North Carolina. And when they do, Howard Manning is going to be a prominent reference in those historical documents, and he deserves every bit of it. Folks, I've been so affected by him that when I left Raleigh, I could have gone home and sat down and retired. But Howard Manning, based on that experience, impressed upon me that we can't retire, we can't quit. We have not yet overcome. We have not even come anywhere near overcoming. The problems that still exist in our schools demand the absolute effort that all of us can make to make a difference. And for the last 3 years, I have been working almost full-time through my institute in the Durham public schools. And Howdy has come out, my office is in the Boroughs Welcome Fund, and he's come out to the Boroughs Welcome Fund, and we've sat there, we've talked, and up until the time he fell ill, he was still very much engaged in wanting to be involved in knowing what's going on. There's still too many kids who can't read. There's still too many schools that don't have adequate teachers. There's still too many kids who are failing, and we cannot afford to keep going in the direction we're going. But we've made progress, and 2 people I want to give credit to. Burley Mitchell for taking the first step that no one else would have had the courage to take, and Howard Manning for being so dedicated and working so hard to move the ball forward. These 2 gentlemen, in my opinion, will be the ones that we should remember as having moved our educational system to the next level. We still got a lot of work to do, but they got us started.
Thank you. Gerry, as a lawyer in the case, what were your interactions with Judge Manning?
Well, they were frequent. We are honoring a giant today, as everyone has said. I really should just say amen to what Howard said and end it at that point, because I agree so much with all of that. We are honoring Howdy today, but it wouldn't bother him for us to say that we're also honoring Burley Mitchell. You know, before there was a case, there were the children, and they were begging for help. And I really don't know if it's Providence or what, but they found both Burley Mitchell and Howdy Manning. As Justice Mitchell said earlier, when the case was presented, there was no substantive right to a quality education in our state. Basically, what the courts had said from time immemorial is they're in the Constitution, they're going to have the buildings, they don't learn anything, it's really too bad, but it's not a constitutional matter. With a stroke of a pen, Justice Mitchell changed that, and then he gave the case to Howdy to breathe life into it. So the next time you hear somebody say that our constitutions are sterile documents, that all judges have to do is just look and see what that word might be, and that's it. It's not the case. Justice Mitchell, it's important, I think this has not been said, it was a unanimous court. This has gone to the Supreme Court twice. Opinion written once by a person who had been a Democrat before they went on the court. I think you leave your partisanship behind when you assume the robes. Second opinion was written by a Republican. They were both unanimous opinions. It's the most extraordinary litigation in my lifetime. I think it will always be a landmark case in the court. Just a quick word about why you had the case. Historically, we had in fact failed large numbers of children, but education is dynamic. There was a time when we weren't bothering very much to educate children of color. Then we were. Then they were part of the mix. The numbers when the 80s came around, identified by good scholarship, Public School Forum, various newspaper articles, other scholarly articles, made the case. 5 counties, this is where I entered the picture, they were part of the Low Wealth Schools Consortium that are my clients. The 70 counties of our 100 that are below average in wealth, that simply lack the ability to provide for their children. They lack the ability. It's not the will, they lack adequate financial ability to provide for their children. The case was filed. Justice Mitchell found what he found in the case. Extraordinary. Leadership means everything. Justice Mitchell and his colleagues found that every child is entitled to something they had not heretofore been entitled to, and not only that, they defined it in soaring language, and they sent that language to Judge Manning. A word about Judge Manning. He and I were in the same college class. We didn't know each other well in college. As I watched him over the years, one of the things that was most gratifying is he did overcome his shyness finally. and was able to actually speak his mind. I've known a lot of brilliant judges. I have known few, if any, of Judge Manning's caliber. He had all the qualities: courage, tenacity, curiosity, an open mind, and a very low tolerance for BS. No matter what it is you wanted to advocate in his court, you weren't going to get very far if you hadn't done your homework and couldn't prove it. This case was ably represented over the years by great counsel on both sides. Tom Zyko is here. He represented the state with distinction throughout the case. Bob Spearman started the case for the plaintiffs, the 5 plaintiff counties in the Low Wealth Consortium that I represented that filed the case. They really stood in the stead of other counties. And that's really the way that Judge Manning tried the case, is he tried them as representative of all the children in the case. I have never known a judge get into a case in the depth that he did. He said in his tape, he talked about a 6-week hearing. He had several hearings that added up, were many times 6 weeks. The opinions that he wrote, some of them were not actually opinions, some of them were ruminations for hundreds and hundreds of pages. And I think one of the things you heard from both Justice Mitchell and Judge Manning today is that you don't always get what you want in these constitutional cases if you're a judge by simply saying to the state, you will do the following 23 things. Sometimes it's very difficult to do that. And Judge Manning knew that. So Judge Manning used jawboning and persuasion in ways I don't think I have ever seen or heard of another judge do. In my work, I frequently talk to superintendents. Every one of them has got a story like Bill, just about. They're sitting in their office, the principal, one of their principals calls up and says, Judge Manning has showed up at the school, what do I do? And after the superintendent would pick themselves up off the floor, they would call the hapless principal, they say, do whatever he says. And when he got to the school, he knew what he was doing, he had done his homework, he was going to find out what was going on at the school. He kept his eye on something I hope we all keep our eye on. You remember, someone said, I think it was, I'm not sure, maybe it was Bill, who said that he said to one principal, I don't want to know any more about those 75 children, I want to know about the 1,200. He kept his eye on the children that most needed the help of the state. One of the things that happened during his very long tenure on this case is that North Carolina went from a point where about 30%, maybe 35% of the children in our public schools were disadvantaged, that means well below the poverty line, to the point now where it's approaching 60%. These are children that need special help, and he knew that, and that's why he crafted his wonderful formulation in the case of great teachers, great principals, and adequate resources so that every child, no matter what their circumstances are, has what they need. And when you think about that, it's a wonderful formulation. It's also what could be a greater challenge. How do you get world-class principals in every school in our state, in some of our poorest counties? To the last day of his participation in this case, Judge Manning was asking that. And I think he said on the tape, and I think others have said here, that that challenge remains before us. An extraordinary leader. Everything we cherish, I think, in our state comes from leaders like Judge Manning, who decide they are going to dedicate themselves to something that is larger than themselves, that is important, that is fundamental, and it is people like that that have made North Carolina what it is. I think Bill Friday would be very happy to know that the two great giants in this litigation, one emerged from North Carolina State and the other from Chapel Hill. I think Friday would have liked that. Howdy would be very proud that you all are here, that you remember what he's done, and that you value it as we all do. It will never be forgotten.
Thank you.